There's somebody. I'll let him in before I start talking. Johnny, have you coming? Okay, yeah. You showed up right as I hit the record button, so I thought I'd wait here before I got started. Oh, and there's somebody else. Two more people. So I'll wait. Audio kicks in before I start talking. Just a little icon. There we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Seemed like some nice weather yesterday. Not the day before though, but spring should be getting close. We're almost to the end of February. I know I'm ready for some warmer weather. But I have this list that I put together the other day, and then over the weekend there was a little bit extra time, so I was double checking things and realized it's kind of a good thing that 3:15 mark on the clock hit, whatever day that was, Thursday, because what I had in mind, I had forgotten that the newest version of the textbook switched the order on a couple things. It switched the order on media and forms, and then the homework followed suit. And I was just kind of going through the order my notes were in, because as we go through the lecture notes on the yellow pages and they move from the left to the right side of the folder, they stay in the same order. So I hadn't checked and was just going off the order from the last 3 times I taught the course and forgot that the textbook switched the order. So it's probably a good thing we didn't get started into media the other day. So that needs pushed back until we're ready to talk about media, because this module is supposed to be talking about forms. I was thinking of the last 3 times I taught the course. And that kind of makes a nice little segue to remind you that I use the statewide course shells as much as I can to be consistent with all the other Ivy texts. And as often happens for those who have an form class, I didn't write the quizzes. This one in particular is in an XML file. Those quizzes are actually come from the publisher in a big XML file, a markup language, which we'll probably look at that one very soon too. Just take a quick pass at it. It's one of the standards for transferring data. But those questions and answers come from the publisher with tags to get a markup language and just get loaded right into Canvas. I didn't write that quiz, so I started going back through the quizzes y'all have taken and putting points back where sometimes I don't like certain questions, or this book, I've been really happy with this book. So on this book, it's mostly whenever there's a vague question. And if I feel I can see how you got that answer, I usually get the points back. But in general, the ones I've looked at, everybody did really, really well on the quizzes. This book's at the 10th edition, so I guess the quizzes all I've been through a few edits as well and matched very precisely what the textbook says. But I have started going back through and putting points on the quizzes that were already taken. I often do that on the quizzes I don't write. Sometimes do that on the quizzes I do write, because y'all take them, 3 or 6 months after I write the quiz. And at that point, looking back on something I did 6 months ago, I was like, oh, that was kind of a vague question. I see how that was confusing, and then it points back on the ones I write too. So I do always try to double check the quizzes, test and stuff. But this module, finishing up today's module, we're going to look at forms, which is kind of nice, but a little bit out of place for the general topic in this course. The web development stuff is spread out amongst several courses. There's this one that covers the HTML and CSS, the static pages where we just display information. And then following that, there'll be a server-side scripting course and a client-side scripting course, because we have different capabilities. One of the biggest, most obvious ones is when we transmit stuff across the internet and run a script on somebody else's computer, it would be a very, very massive security breach if we had the ability to write a file from a script we transmitted across the internet. So client-side scripting, you don't have write access to do anything. You can't do anything except inside that little bitty browser window, and even there's some restrictions. But we often have to do certain things like writing files on the server-side scripts. But also servers are typically much bigger, more powerful machines. So we can do a lot more complicated calculations quicker on the server. And the trade-off is that transmission. If we do it on the server, then we have to transmit the results. But if we do it on the client, we're going to have certain restrictions, particularly that write access or other things that might be viewed as security breaches. And our next topic goes with that, HTML forms. Input tags. Tags where we can input things like text is our basic one. If we just say input tag, it gives us a spot to enter text. But we can add a little bit to that and get a lot more details. So because text isn't always what we want. For example, color. If we're getting color data from a user, we probably need a preset to give us a color format, like hexadecimal or RGB or HSL or HSV or a couple others. I think those are the ones we talked about. We didn't see HSV, we saw HSL. Yeah, RGB, HSL, or hexadecimal, we want at least those three that we've seen here. And if we ask the average human for a color, they're probably not going to give us a hexadecimal color. Any computer person would know that, but most of humanity would just give us the name of a color or be not quite sure what to give us. So we just need a spot for them to click on. Place to enter passwords, because we don't necessarily want to see that. We could use scripts to set this up so that whenever text is typed comes from the keyboard and shows up on the screen, it doesn't actually show up on the screen. We put an asterisk there or something instead of whatever they type. But that's a very common thing, so it's already built in. Picking dates. There's lots of ways that we can enter dates. Right? And not just international style or American style, right? There's a lot of variety in how we could enter today's date. 2/21/2022 is what it shows on that screen. Could do an international style and say 21/2/2020 or 21/02/2020 or back to the normal American one, 02/21/2022. Or we could write February 21st, 2022. Or you just write 22 instead of the whole year. I think y'all know where that's going. A lot of different ways we can enter the date. Or write out February, we could write F-E-B, spell the whole word out. It's a very common one to be misspelled, right? So there's a lot of ways that it could be spelled, and most other humans would know exactly what month you're talking about, because February is a hard word to spell. Or it's not a hard word to spell. It's not a straightforward word to spell because it's not spelled in the same order we pronounce the letters in. We pronounce them in a different order than they're written. So things like date inputs and that's what we're going to be looking at. Which means we're getting data from a user. We probably want to save that data, right? So, like I just mentioned, if we do a client-side script, we don't have any write access. We can save it as cookies, but there are problems with that. It's much, much better if we're collecting the data, send it to a server and process it on server side on PHP. So we'll look at doing that. And this textbook covers the HTML and CSS, and they take a quick look at JavaScript. When I was taking an equivalent class to this, it was all HTML and PHP. And JavaScript just got a casual mention. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at both. I think we're going to have a class today, so probably after we do the form, we'll look at a quick PHP script, which does have to run on a server or a virtual server. I just realized I don't think I reinstalled the virtual server I like after the factory reboot on my laptop. So I'll just use the actual server. I just did a test to make sure it would work. So we'll see that here in a second. So we're going to spend a little while looking at forms. Initially, and hence from the name, we'll look at the form elements, get some input from the users. And we probably want to put that somewhere. Or we probably want to do some stuff with it. Right? Maybe we're just making a simple app, like a tip calculator. The website just calculates what a 15 or 20% tip is, or 22 or 25. All the common ones we normally see printed out on the receipt when we go to a restaurant. Just have it on our website, and then the user can do that. That's a good example of something we can do on the client side. We don't need to keep that data. It's basically a calculator, right? Input this number, we'll do some processing, and spit the number back out. That's the sort of stuff we want to do on client side scripting, but we're going to keep the data around. Like your homework assignment this week is set up reservations for that hotel or cabins in the woods, what they call them, yurts. Yeah, so dirt huts instead of cabin, but I'd still say cabin if I was just describing it to somebody. You kayak for a while and sleep in a little cabin or a little dirt hut with the dirt floor. But anyway, that's beside the point. So that sort of thing, we want to keep that data stored somewhere. So that needs done on the server side script. And all our book really covers about that is says, here's this address where a server side script was put together. Plug this into your code, and then it will work. In theory, what's supposed to happen. But we have no control over that website. We can't even get on there and see the server side scripts. So I want to look at server side scripts after we look at forms and a client side script, and look at a couple of these things where we can input stuff. So this is the sort of thing that's going to show up a whole lot more in those next two classes to finish out full stack development, the server side and client side script. So after that, we'll go through a couple of scripts. So these are what we refer to as HTML form elements for web page information from user, and most of them are just we have some single tags or standalone tags or standalone and closing tags. If all you need is a opening tag, it doesn't throw an error if you do the open close pair. Some people actually prefer that because then it's more consistent. Right? We're doing open, our tags always come in pairs. They don't have to stop and think about whether they need it. If they're in a situation where they don't need that closing one. And typically nothing goes inside of there because that's where inside of that element is just an empty space where the user can type some stuff or click on things for some of our forms, like colors and dates. These inputs go, and then these go inside a form element. And the form element will tell us how, is where we put how to process it. Yeah, there's really only two ways we'll do that, either get or post. I'll make sure and show both of them at some point today. There's a third way that exists with the network, but we don't really send those back there. And so we have request as well. We also use request. So there's fourth way. But there's a very short list of ways that machines actually communicate with each other. Typically we'll use post because it's a little more secure. It doesn't show in the address bar. But if we use a get, it tacks some stuff on at the end of the address bar. In the form you've probably seen, it puts a question mark at the end and then adds the data afterwards. We see those in search queries and things where it's not, where it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be secure. So you've probably seen those sort of addresses, like go to YouTube and search for funny cat videos. You get the YouTube address and then like search results, question mark, funny plus cat plus videos. And that whole long string gets added on to the end of the URL for YouTube. You've probably seen that, and if we can see it, that's a GET request. So when we're debugging stuff, it's really, really nice to actually set it for a GET, and that way we can see what's being sent to the server. But then in production, we probably want to switch that over to a post so that it doesn't just show in the address bar all the time. So our most basic one is an input. I guess we'll just start building these up. And once again, there's a long list, and I'm going to open an example just to make sure I don't drift down a rabbit hole. I think I've got 15 things on this. That's probably enough to get us started. 15 different types of inputs is a good start. We don't need to try to shove 150 into a 3-hour lecture. Just kind of see some of the main points here. Spring 2020, that's the one I wanted. There it is. Or almost. There's this. Okay. Pull up this so I don't go down a big rabbit hole and share my screen. Oh, and right before class, just like a couple seconds before the first of y'all logged in today, I did throw a PHP script onto the that site that I recommended. Most of them will work with PHP by default. So that Affinity free site that I recommended does work by default. Those who are using a different website, if your other free domain host has access to a MySQL database, at least one, then PHP will work by default. If not, you might need to upload a script to see if it does, and you have to change some configurations. But all in all, it might be easier if your normal site doesn't allow for PHP server-side scripting to just jump over to another free domain host that does, because WordPress, one of the most popular ways to make websites, ultimately that's where this pathway is heading. Right? We're learning the HTML coding, but in the long run, we're going to write a program that writes all this HTML code. And then artists can just drag their mouse around, choose colors, and make it look nice. And then they iterate this code in the background, but we have to learn it before we do all that. Yes, I'll just go over here. So here's that file that was over here. Notice it has, should look like a tag. It's spread out over a couple lines, but those angle brackets, PHP. tag is one way to think about it. Which might kind of give you a hint that it's a tag, so it could sit right inside of our HTML. If you're thinking that, yes, it can. And then PHP is a flavor of C++. It's an interpreted, it's C++ interpreted. It's an interpreted version of C++ instead of compiled. So we have to have curly braces and semicolons. I don't have any semicolons, but here's a simple test code. Just echo back the words "hello world." So I uploaded that to make sure it would work. As we see just those words, but if I view the page source, you notice that's all that we see. As far as the browser knows, that's the entire file because it's server-side scripting. So the server did not send any of the PHP script. From the client side, we cannot see the PHP. That can only run on a server. So all we saw is the part, that little part there that was actually sent back. So echo is, that means send it to the client. Like a client formed a connection, echo back to these words, or echo back to this text is what that instruction is. So that Infinity Free site runs it right off the bat. The quick way to check is if you have access to a MySQL database, then you will be able to run PHP by default. If you don't have a MySQL database on your free domain host, just upload a script. We'll see them here in a little while, at least a basic one or something like that that just has the PHP tag and echoes back to where it's hello world. The standard check just to make sure everything is connected. And see if it runs. And if not, the easiest way is probably jump over to a free domain host that does allow that to do any of that stuff. So, I guess I'll make a new folder. I'll add a project folder. Is there anything I can do? Oh yeah, it's holiday. I didn't really want to type today's dates because there's a lot of twos in there. But it's President's Day. Oh, wait. I have to create the folder. Create a new folder called Presidents. There you go. Let's select that one. I think I misspelled it, but that'll be okay. The computer doesn't know how to spell that word either. So with that file selected, into the stuff we've seen many, many times. Save an HTML file in here. I'm gonna call it forms.html instead of index, because I want to see a table of contents when we go look at that after it's put on the server. Since we are going to look at a PHP script, I want to see the table of contents, not the index file this time. Is the only reason for the name there. And then just like we've seen many, many times, I'm using a text editor that sets up a whole lot of stuff, but hopefully by this point, if your predictive text doesn't do quite that much, you have a starter template saved somewhere you can use. You're gonna need mostly that stuff every time. This line we don't really need. Our textbook really likes that line. That's set as the default. The textbook also really, really likes one about viewport that was used on, it was necessary to view the web pages on iPhones up through i3, I think, iPhone 3. And that was a long time ago. We're up in the teens now on iPhones, so that metadata viewport command hasn't been used in a while, but it's still all over the textbook. Textbooks are bad about that. It takes a long time for the author to make the changes, affirm them, and send them to the editors, and editors go through them, and then all the typesetters and graphic designers to get it laid out properly and send that to the actual printing press, the mechanical workers for the printing press. And it's a very slow process on textbooks, so sometimes they'll get a little out of date, which is something you definitely always want to keep up on your way through school, especially in technology. It changes quick. That's why I always give those assignments for the new technology report. So I'll create a form, and notice it started a couple things out. Gave us a class name. An action is what happens when we submit the form. I'll fill those in later. This should really be uppercase. Kind of slacked off on that over the past few years because all of our modern servers just go ahead and check, and if it sees post in lowercase letters, it'll switch it to the uppercase letters it needs to be. But, there might still be some old servers in existence out there. And, those are high quality, reliable machines, so they last for a while. So it's better for them to do that post and get in all uppercase letters. The actual server transmission, the stuff that goes all the way back to the original ARPANET server and client communication protocols. So we're going to start with, I'll do field sets. Well, I'll start with an input. I'll just start with our basic input. Do I need anything else on this? Oh, try to say input and open it up. That's not what I meant to click. I have no idea why I just clicked there. So I'll just put in an input tag. And then come over to wherever that's stored and open it up. We've seen that a few times. You can see that gives us a place to start typing. You can put in a bunch of letters, numbers, some of our special characters up there. Can't really do anything with it, but our basic one is just a text input. The normal standard in for the system. That's where you're going to hear a lot on your way through your technology program is the standard in, usually abbreviated STD.in, to the standard input for the machine you're on, which is pretty much always the keyboard or the touch screen. And since keyboards are so common, in particular, it's the soft keyboard is the anticipated standard input for the thing, and then the mouse is secondary. Clicking on your touch screen is considered secondary just to relate to the mouse thing. Make it all lined up nicely. But in general, we have more than just stuff in the keyboard that we might want to get confused. We're more than just words and numbers and symbols, letters and numbers and symbols. So it's generally a good idea to include this type attribute. And one other one we need, maybe two other ones. Whenever we go to process this data on the server does need the name attribute. Name equals txt input. I'll just write, that's probably not a good one. I'll call it words. That sounds like text. Just like class and ID, the name attribute uniquely identifies that. Semi-uniquely, sometimes they do need connected, such as when we do a radio button. That's the round ones where we can only select one. If we click on a different round one, the previous one deselects. In order to do that, we give them all the same name attribute, and the computer knows that only one of those can be clicked at a time. So we use the name attribute. The name attribute is unique, but it, like with the radio buttons, we can put it in more than one place. We need all of those to really count as the same thing. And then the one that's selected is our value. But we'll see radio buttons here in a few minutes. So the server-side scripting does have to have the name attribute. The homework assignment this week is kind of vague on that. It says make an input and name it my last name or something like that, whatever they said in the instructions. But when they say name it, that does explicitly refer to the name input, which is something else. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do the CSS now. So before we get very far along, we want to style these things. I'm going to go ahead and do it now because we're just talking about the name attribute. I just pointed out that the server-side scripting has to have the name attribute. When we use that action attribute, it grabs everything that is put inside of that input, what we got from the input we got from the user, and assigns it to a variable with the name attribute and sends it to the server. So if there's no name attribute, the server can't access it. As an associative array or a dictionary or a map or whatever term you most prefer for the key value pair data structures, is how it gets sent to the server using the name attribute. Which means that would be a great way to style our inputs, right? So we, if we have to have that, oops, href equals, I'll just call it form.css. It's a good name for it. Let me go ahead and start dropping the MIME type. I just wanted to show that at the beginning of the semester a couple times because it doesn't really show up anywhere in the curriculum. Okay, so now I need this file. So I'll create a new file so we can add some style rules. Called forms.css. And we're going to style this input. And we saw IDs and classes, we've used those a lot, right? If there's an ID that uniquely identify it, we could say this. Or if there was a class, if we used a class name, we could say this. We haven't seen anything that relates to the name attribute, right? And this is one that your textbook does not have. I haven't seen a way to select by the name attribute. And one of the things that the textbook didn't include is in all these tags, we have lots and lots of attributes, right? Now these attributes describing the tag. We can use that as a selector as well. So we look at input tags, and then in square brackets, that means that allows us to select by an attribute. So an input tag with the type attribute equal to words. Oh wait, type attribute equal to text, sorry. Or name attribute equal to words. That's what I was actually thinking. But any attribute we put in our tag, we can select this one. So the tag name, square brackets, and then spaces are important, so no spaces. And attribute equals words, no spaces, no quotes. then that should select that one, and we can make that have a, I don't know, a different background color. That's a very, very useful one, because we have to have a name attribute there in order for the server to process it. So it'd be really, really nice to style it off that identifier that has to be there, instead of adding an extra one in. Or if you're gonna do client side and server side scripting, you'll want both a name and an ID, because the client side scripting is much easier with with an ID. We have all of the same selectors we do in CSS, and a few more in the HTML5 standard or JavaScript. But ID is definitely the easiest one to use in JavaScript. So if you're gonna have both client and server side scripts, you can just use, make sure you have a name and an ID attribute for your inputs. That's text, that's our basic one. I'll put a number one in here, and then we'll clean this up a little bit. Input type equals number. That'll work. I'm gonna add some more stuff to it after we see it. So once again, an input tag and the type attribute equals number. So the first thing you're probably noticing is that there's no line break included in an input. So we'll need some sort of formatting tag. I like to use paragraph tags, but anything that includes a line break. So we could just use the BR tag, the line break tag itself. A lot of people do that. I like to use paragraph tags myself. Mostly just because on a typical website, there will be some styling rules for a paragraph already. So that it'll be consistent with the margins and padding and things elsewhere on the page or on the site to look consistent. List items are also very nice, because usually we want our form to kind of go nice and organized in a straight line and look like a list. But anything that would have a break included. You'll have seen a few of them now, so I'm just going to use a paragraph. Not necessarily going to do any styling on that, but or at least not right now. But a paragraph tag does include a line break. So does a list item. That's probably what our textbook uses. He seems to love, whoever wrote the textbook really, really likes lists. I think I mentioned before that when I took a class on HTML, when was the formal class on it? Over 10 years ago. The book never even mentioned the list. Well, the finite amount of stuff we can put in a book unless it gets to be a really, really, really big book that nobody's going to read, especially in the time frame of the semester. So some things get cut out, and a lot of that's on author choice. So there are more tags than we are covering in this class, right? We only have 8 weeks to talk about all this stuff, so there's a lot to talk about. So I'll give us some line breaks in between them. Then we can do formatting and put some stuff before them. I think the author of our textbook also likes to use the label stuff. I don't ever use that myself, because Word show it doesn't do anything different than Word showing up before or using the attribute for it, but it gives in some situations it gives an error message if you don't use the for attribute. It doesn't do anything that can't be done anywhere else. It's more commonly used, except occasionally give an error message. It doesn't, or a warning. It still runs fine. So it's not an error, it's just a warning that a human put there, not a computer. So I always just throw the words right there before it. If anything, maybe put a span tag so that stuff lines up. Or set it up in like grids and flex boxes like we saw. That's a much easier way to make everything line up. But we've seen quite a few ways of doing that, so today we're pretty much just going to look at this stuff. So that gets a start on there. We've got quite a few we're going to look at. Some organization would be nice, right? Just organize that. One of the most common ways, one that's actually built for a form, is inside the form we can set up with a field set tag. So if we grab those inputs we have in field set, and then I'll do some indenting just to keep that consistent. Basically, that just draws a box around our stuff. A little bit different than a border. We could, well, with what it is now, we could do it as a border. Field set also has this option. We can put in a legend. Oh no, I'll just say inputs. So a field set allows us to put in a legend that you'll see there appears in the middle of that box. So that's a step above what we could do in a border. So that's a common way to categorize them. Usually some labels. And then we can nest those. So maybe I'll make a number of that. So I'm gonna cut that from there and paste it here. And then put a legend for a numerical. So just some organization, categorization, however you want to think of it, to help keep the form looking nice and labeled and make it very clear to the user what needs done in each spot. If we don't do anything in the numbers, we get this type of box, which the industry has not settled on a name for. So you will see these called different things. A number input, spinners are started showing up more and more, but it's still, there's not really a consistent name across the input. Or across the software development industry. Google calls them spinners. That's what Google makes their developers call them. So that number has definitely been growing with popularity, as popular as Google is when they decide on a word. That kind of carries through. But that's as official as it goes. Google also makes all their developers name everything in Hungarian notation. So any variables would just have an M in front of it. Sometimes an M underscore. But that's a note for a different class. So whatever you want to call the number box, spinner is becoming very popular because it's supposed to look like a spinner thing. But at the same time, y'all are probably familiar with the calendars that have something that actually seems more like a spinner than that little click, right? Where we actually spin our numbers, especially on phones, where they can find a date, you pull up the month, and then you just have to spin to the year. That seems like the thing that should be called spinner. So I'm just going to call these number inputs. But we can do some other things with them. We could set a starting value. So by default, let's start at 0. Oh, there was already something in there. Let me take that out so you can see the change. I'll take that out and reload it. And you'll notice that without that, there's nothing in there. Once you put a number in there, you can't get a number back out. Oops. Undo. There we go. And the value attribute gives us a default version for that. Another useful one, we're talking about values. I'll jump back up to the text box. Might want like hint text is what I always call it. Instead of a label, and this is part of the reason I don't ever worry about the labels. Normally when I'm making forms, I don't necessarily put a label on them anymore. That seems a little out of style, and instead use that grayed out text inside the box, which is called placeholder. So our placeholder attribute might say enters some words. And for the past few years, that's become more common to see that than labels. Because the labels require a bunch of styling to line back up and things like that. And don't always translate very well. Because that's another problem with that for attribute and labels. Remember up here in our HTML tag, it explicitly says we're making this site in English. So if we want some German people to use our site, that for attribute becomes problematic. Because a whole lot of things get translated automatically. So I'm just going to put text in here, but our textbook really likes that label element. It doesn't really provide any benefits we wouldn't have elsewhere. What else is about? Oh, once again, we will need a name attribute so that it can access it. I'm just making some name attributes up. There's a good chance when we get to the PHP script, I will change those on a few things to something more useful, more meaningful. Minimum and maximum can be useful. Set a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 100. That's really good. And I'll change that label to say integer. So now you'll notice that the down clicking thing doesn't go anywhere. Up clicking works until we get up to 100. And then it's going to stop working. And you notice the default goes by integers. So I'm just going to duplicate that line. Control-Shift-D for duplicate on that one I'm on. And maybe we want a floating point number instead of an integer. We'll start at 0. Whoops. Whoops. That should really be a string just from our HTML conventions. Putting the number there would show up on your validation thing. Y'all have probably noticed by now that I haven't really expressed much about that. It's in the homework assignments, it was there. As long as you're aware that a validator exists, I'm fine with that. I have put a whole lot of things on the internet that work fine that do not validate. Oh, and for next week's lecture, or Wednesday's lecture, or sometime soon, the stuff from YouTube, the stuff from Twitter, the stuff from TikTok, and a couple others. I think this that stuff will not validate. So if you embed a YouTube video in your page or a TikTok video or PayPal button, it won't pass validation. I think Reddit will. The people who are Reddit, it actually It does actually validate to the standards. But there's a difference between validating and working. I've put a whole lot of things on the internet that would not validate. So that gives us a floating point number, almost. I'll call this small count. And the difference is the default is it moves by integers, or the step size is an integer. So we set the step attribute to something small. I'll use 0.001. Without the quote marks, it would still run, but the validator would not like it because the HTML attributes always need set to a string according to validation. But if there's obviously quote marks in, your browser can start that. Why did that start at 0.0? Let's make that in the wrong thing. Oh. The integer one I wanted at 0. There we go. So this one goes up by integers, but this one goes up by that very small number. Or if you're looking at prices, you want to make sure it's a floating point number or something. But that adjusts by your step size to the spinner. But you can also just type a number in there. Notice that it had no trouble when I typed decimals in that integer part. So that step size only applies to little figures. Can't type letters though. You'll notice I'm pushing my keyboard here. I don't know if you can hear the, trying to push it really hard so you can hear the clicking. Maybe if you can't see it, it won't type letters in the number box. I mean number. No surprises there. Maybe easier ways for humans to enter numbers, right? Than typing things. The slider. So it's just having a little lever that we like all the way to the left is 0 and all the way to the right is 100. We just move that back and forth to the point we want it. And that is the input with type equal to range. Whoops. I can spell it. A range of numbers. Let's say we'll start at 50. Name equals slide. I'll just call it slider. Because we usually want to have a name. And, well, in general, you want to have a name and an ID. You're probably going to have server and client-side scripting. But I don't think we're going to get to the client-side scripting until Thursday. So today we're going to see server-side scripting. So I want to make sure it has a name so we can send it to the server. Let's say minimum of 0 and a maximum of 100. And I'm not going to worry about the step size. Trying to get where it all shows on the screen. Yeah. So a range type gives us a little thing we can grab and move. Those are a little tricky to style because we kind of have to use custom libraries to style them. That won't be hard. So that one we won't see the styling until we get to the odds and ends at the end. I'm thinking the first day of week 8 or module 8 is when it looks like that'll show up. They're a little bit trickier to style in cascading style sheets because the whole area, if we try to use our CSS rules on that, what we get is that box that it's inside of. So all those pieces in there, the little thumb that we grab, the rail that it slides on, the outline of the rail, the thumb, outline of the thumb. Lots and lots of different things that we have to get in and style that aren't in the general CSS. We have to access a library, that custom library that knows about it. Mozilla has a nice one. Mozilla has a really nice one that works in all the other browsers. So that's the one you will see used most often, but we'll look at a couple of them. Probably the first day of module 8 is what I'm thinking. Oh, yes. And so it does count this as 0 and this is 100, but we need a script to see that. That's a good place for a client-side script, because that would be a lot to transmit the position of the of that slider to the server, and then get a response back from the server. It's a lot easier just to have a client-side script, look at where that slider's at, and print the words right there on the thing. So we do have to have a script too if we want to see what that value is. But that one's a lot easier for most people to use, especially on something like I mentioned. Will probably be our JavaScript example, a simple tip calculator. Then we just do a slider, and you don't have to worry about exactly 15%, or have the slider go from like 10 to 30%. You just move it to how happy you are with your server. And we wouldn't even have to really put the numbers. Right? Put a frowny face on one side, a frowny emoji on one side, and a smiley emoji on the other side, and humans would know what that meant on a tip calculator. It's probably what we'll do on Thursday. So I guess there's a couple of those. Ways to get numbers. So I'll come out of that field set, and field sets, which essentially just give us a border, except that we can put a legend in there nested in a really nice place and looks nice for the organization. And we can style that field set and the legend with CSS, like we've seen over and over again. You all know a bunch of that part, so I'll skip that one. This one I think I looked at earlier in the semester. Type equals color. I really like to throw this one in almost randomly when creating websites. Not really randomly, because it's useful when creating a website. The name indicates what it is. It's our little color picker. Excuse me. And the reason I like this is so we can put that color input any place we want on the page. And then if we wanted to match some colors, like, okay, I want to match that. Like, okay, let's say that pink up there is the company colors. We have something that matches that, but not quite an exact thing. We can pull this up and see right beside the thing. So maybe some purple beside it. And then see those colors right next to each other. And then here we see the RGB or so that zoom button's right my way. RGB or HSL or hexadecimal. It sends hexadecimal to the server. Hexadecimal is then we see hex, we're actually working in binary, just working in binary 4 bits at a time, which is a lot better for humans. So that's the standard for programming. CSS specifically has RGB and HSL as well. Or we have the color picker here. So we just go up here and pick the color, and then it'll tell us what that is. So really, really useful while putting the pages together, and then just delete that tag out of there when you get to the final version. So that is an incredibly useful one, not just for user input, but for for building web pages in general. Then our value needs to be a hexadecimal color. E2A476. If you want a default color for it, start with, instead of just, well, the default color is black, but if you want to change that default color, if you want to override it, it does have to be a hexadecimal color. Remember, those other colors are specific to CSS. We don't always have those to the extent that, since HTML5 does have a standard for styling rules, that's worked into other programming languages. So most of our programming languages do accept CSS. So we do have that elsewhere, but technically we should be using hexadecimal any place outside of CSS. I'll say it that way. I think everybody in here has been alive long enough to know how the technically stuff works. Okay, that's what it's supposed to be, but doesn't necessarily have to be that. Email is a useful input, right? Input type equals email. In the paragraph tag. Again, name. We might need that name attribute. So colors and name equals contact. I'm gonna do a phone thing. Name equals email. That'll work. Those two things only look the same to us. The computer would never get them confused. So if that's the best name, you can kind of go with that. So the thing about emails, I can't see it. It's expecting an email address. So once we have a submit button here, I guess I'll put the submit button on there. So we can see it. It's expecting an input. So input type equals submit. This almost always looks like this. I'll space it out a little. There's another input with type equal to reset and value equal to reset. So probably no surprise that you know what those two types of inputs do. One's called submit, one's called reset. So you should have a pretty good guess at what those do. I put a bunch of numbers in here. Move this, pick a different color. And the reset button just clears it without reloading the page. So no surprise there. The submit button is going to try to submit it. It's going to do whatever the action attribute on the form said to do, which there's not one yet. So I'll put this, and notice it's expecting an email address to be put in there. So whatever goes in there needs to look like an email address if there's a default message. We have a couple of inputs that have that. It has some validation. Validating your input will be a big deal in the client side and the server side scripting classes both, because that's a big issue, and we usually need a custom script to do it because we need to know the exact situation we're in to validate most things. So a few things though, like an email address, those all look the same, so if it doesn't look like an email address, it's automatically gonna fail validation. Said this site. Which any human's gonna look at that and realize that's not a real email address. But a computer didn't know it because it had the @ symbol, and then it had a domain name, or something that looked like a domain name. We didn't tell it to do anything on the action attribute of the form, so all it did is reload. But it tried to submit the form. I didn't call that last one contact someone to do a phone number thing. So it's not really a good phone number. Did we see phone number links? There is a specific phone number link that will call a number. I don't think we saw that this semester. I will work that in. I will bring that up very, very soon. But for like a phone number, what I usually like to do is just make it a text one, and then just use a placeholder to show what the number should look like. Something like that. Or whatever the validation is going to be. Maybe your script's going to validate it just the numbers with no special characters. You just put that in as the placeholder, the hint text that shows in the background. Yeah, since I just mentioned it, I did that because well, we'll see that soon. We can put a phone number in the anchor tag and in a way that it'll call it. We use the anchor tag to just call a phone number. It's great on mobile devices. On your desktops and stuff, if you're on a Microsoft computer, it will probably try to install Skype automatically when you do that. So that can be annoying. Or open up whatever would make a phone call, like Zoom. It would just, if you had Zoom installed, it would open up Zoom and make a phone call with it. It's a little inconvenient at times, but really, really nice on when we look at it on our phones, because then we can just scroll to the web page, see a company's number, and click that, and it calls them automatically. That's just something in links, which we will see soon. So if we want a phone number input, I usually like to do something like that. Just a text one. Because a phone number is not a number, is the main thing to remember. It's all digits, but we can't do math with phone numbers, right? We can't add two people's phone number together and have any sort of prediction of whose number that would be. If we add two phone numbers, we'd probably have too many digits for it to still be a phone number. Or like zip codes as well. A couple towns nearby, so like Jeffersonville and Clarksville, right? Zip or New Albany. I always get confused. I've lived throughout my life. I've lived in Jeffersonville and New Albany, and I get the zip codes confused. I've been in Clarksville for 15 years. One of them is 47130, and then in Clarksville is 47129. So if we added those together, we'd get what 94259. That's somewhere in California, somewhere in Southern California. I know that just because of the 9 at the first spot. It's still the right number of digits to be a zip code. The 9 in the first spot tells us it's California. The 2 brings us down the bottom quarter of California, because California is big. It's got a lot of zip codes, more than just one number for the whole state. So we can narrow it down, but that doesn't really mean anything. That's just a random chance that those numbers added up to find a zip code. We could add 2 other zip codes and it would be completely meaningless. Two more real quick. Passwords are useful, which is really just a text field. But the difference is it stays hidden. And I'll go ahead and put, oops. I'll go ahead and put the date on him, and then it'll be a good time for a break. Type equals date, just using the default, nothing fancy here. Passwords and dates, those are going to be useful ones. Password's just a text field, but it's set up so that we don't see the text that's typed in. The normal dot appearance. And notice the default does not have a little eyeball where we can click on it to see that. That's something you actually have to do in your script. You have to write a script to manually do that. And then the date. The default is today's date. We can set that to something else. Just choose whichever date we want. A today button. I have another browser on here. Edge replaced all their background stuff with Chromium. So Edge and Chrome are essentially the same thing. Just the front end looks different. You see the stuff basically looks the same. Okay, yeah, that still looks the same. Edge used to have a different one. Firefox has a slightly different calendar. Edge used to have that scroll wheel thingy. The thing actually that the word spinner makes more sense for. We used to have one of those, but now that Edge is Chrome, it just gets the Google appearance, and they just adjusted it a little. They also had their own unique slider and color picker. Oops. Let's see if they did still have the color picker. Because they did have the Microsoft color picker, which is a little bit better than the Google color picker, I thought. No, they have the Google color picker now. I don't know what I was expecting. So a bunch of inputs. Got a couple more to talk about. And then I was gonna there's some stuff on the screen. Oh, well, I'll put one more in here real quick because it matches something we just talked about. We saw these inputs for with type equal to submit and type equal to reset. There is a button tag explicitly. And a non-breaking space or really a couple of those. And then we do have a tag called button, which if we just do the opening and close tags, gives us that a little gray dot. And this one has open and close tags, so we'll put some words on here. Whatever's in the middle will show on that. And we're getting ready to take a break, and notice up in the address bar. Here's our web page. So if I type some stuff in here, some words, an integer here, some floating point number there, move the slider a little. Enter a phone number 555 and a date a couple days from now. And if the regular button is inside your form, it will try to submit it unless you tell it to do something otherwise. We'll talk about that later. But notice what happened to the URL. This was our website, so it added on this question mark. I always like to think of that as a hook. It hooked some data onto our URL. Or when we go to another script, like a PHP script, it will hook the data onto the URL. And some of this should look familiar. Words equals sum plus words. Sum plus words is what I typed in the box. And words was the name attribute of that field. Counting as an integer, small count, that's that floating point number, the slider, those were all names. Colors, email. But notice it didn't pass anything for the password or the date field. Essentially, the name attribute becomes a variable that we can assign the data to. And since password and date did not have, I'll just look here. Password and date did not have a name attribute, nor did phone number. It couldn't do anything with that data. It's like, okay, I don't have any place to store that data. So you always want to make sure there's at least a name attribute so you can send the stuff to a server. We can use all of them on the client side. Some people like to use name on the client side scripting. It's not really difficult, but it's easier to use the ID on with JavaScript. Name equals phone call. Name equals secret. Just some random names here. Name equals someday. The typical variable stuff. We want a meaningful place to put that data. Here are some words. 5, 3.14. I'll slide this over. We can't see the number anywhere, but it did show up on the last one. Some blue color. There's a fake site. That seems like a good number. And when I hit submit, you'll see we now have all of that stuff. That words, the name attribute of the field, was assigned to this value, with spaces replaced by a plus sign. And the counting name attribute has a 5, the small count has a 5, slider has a 3, colors have this, and email is this. And it seems to have gotten stuck. So that didn't really work for the password. So I'm going to move this up here and put the date first. And yeah, that's probably that'll probably be good. You'll notice most of them are blank. Oh, maybe it's running out of time. Now we got that date field. It cut it off after the password field. I thought that was a scary thing, because I've done that a few times, but it's trying to show the name. Maybe we just can't put anything in there. So I put something there. and do a date and hit submit. Oh, it just showed it. So that's why we have to be careful. Okay, I don't know why it didn't show it the first time. It's got to truncated it somewhere. But notice the password is human readable. That can be an issue on as we pass those. We'll see a couple more, but it's probably a good time to take a break, right? That gives us quite a few ways to start getting input from users. And then we can do stuff with them. So we're just going to take a quick look at scripts in this class. We'll look at server-side scripts shortly, very quickly after a couple more inputs. And then on Thursday, we'll look at client-side scripts. But it's probably a good time for a break. 10 minutes sound good to everybody? Or anybody?
Sounds good.
2:22, we'll get back to it at 2:32.